Welcome to the Steel Men Podcast, a 15-minute podcast where we do a short dive into a news story and try to have an honest conversation about it. We're the Steel Men. My name is Will, and with me is Jay. Say hi, Jay.
Hey, Will.
All right, let's jump right in. Jay, did you know that the Netflix series Cuties is basically the prequel to Showgirls?
No, I didn't know that.
Cuties is actually a Netflix series you probably heard of that's garnered a lot of outrage recently on Twitter because they posted a short, maybe 30-second scene where the girls are dancing, and it's pretty raunchy. The show is from French director and writer Maimouna Dacour, and it's about a Muslim girl living in France in a strict religious community. At some point, she discovers that her father is taking on a second wife, and this causes a lot of pain for her mother, who has to pretend to support it. So the girl notices this. She internalizes her mother's misery. She starts to rebel, and part of that rebellion is to get involved with a group of girls who are into some raunchy behavior that's way above their appropriate for their age, I should say. So the film does attempt to show that even though the girls kind of behave in this way, this overly sexually way, that they don't fully comprehend what they're doing. One particular, that dancing that we're talking about, there is a spoiler alert for anybody who's going to see that. That infamous dance scene is kind of the turning point for the main character. So it is pretty bad. It outraged me, I guess. It was disgusting to me. So I get where people are coming from. But to be fair to the show, apparently that's the turning point in which the little girl says, "Oh yeah, this is way too much for me," also, and kind of returns back to her normal lifestyle. So that's an overview of Cuties. What we're going to talk about next is a particular New Yorker article by a Richard Brody, and it's titled Cuties, the extraordinary Netflix debut that became the target of a right-wing campaign. Now, he also goes through and describes the show, but the two main points that he really focuses on is, one, that the show doesn't celebrate the sexualization of children. It actually criticizes it. So we want to kind of talk about, is that an important distinction to make or not? And then the second thing he wants to do is he accuses the criticism to be a right-wing attack, and he implies heavily that right-wingers don't actually even care about the children. They're more upset that the show is about immigrants. What is your take on this, Jay?
I had a visceral reaction as I was scrolling through my Twitter feed. I kept seeing talk about this movie, and eventually I scrolled past the promo art that shows these four prepubescent girls. They look 12 or 13 max, dressed as strippers, basically, posing as strippers. I did not care to go to research any further into the actual contents of the movie. So, full disclosure, we neither one of us have seen it. Don't plan to. Don't think I need to. But I think it is a good question to ask, regardless of what was intended. And from all the reviews I've read, it is absolutely a negative commentary on this phenomenon. And it sounds like the movie's addressing France's situation. But we know this sort of culture, the beauty pageants, kids' beauty pageants is everywhere. So to me, the question, if what we can assume is true about the movie, even though we haven't seen it, that there are these gratuitous sexual dance scenes, is it okay to do it, even if your message is criticizing it? So, yeah, it's a great question.
It seems kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be, because here's the thing. If you're one of these people who gets off on this sort of thing, this is a free ride right there on Netflix. And the thought that no matter what the message is, that these children will almost definitely be used to satisfy perverts cannot be overlooked. It's a fact. Now, here, if it does that, but at the same time, it causes an outrage and a recognition that this is a problem, maybe in the long run, the director's choice to do the whole movie in the first place was a good one. But we may never know the answer to that question. But the second question, and the one I think, because certainly there were people who didn't understand that the message of the movie was criticizing the behavior. And those people probably just need to do a little bit more research before they flip out. But I think then the question becomes: did you need to put in the dances, these gratuitous dance scenes, to get the point across? And I think probably no, but I'm not sure. I came across this on Twitter because so many people were outraged by the dance scenes. Would it even be on people's radar if they didn't include the dance scenes? The thought that it could be used by perverts, does that overshadow the possibility that not including those dance scenes would have not created any stir, would have not blown up people's Twitter timelines, making them look into this issue?
What do you think about the National Review made a kind of a parallel between making a movie about criticizing animal cruelty by including actual animal cruelty? I mean, what do you think about that parallel as like a criticism of it?
Well, it's a fine parallel. It has obvious differences. Yeah, animals obviously can't make any decisions for themselves or their kids, whereas we count on humans and parents to do that. So that element makes it different. But I will say how I do think it's kind of the same. Provocative things create conversation. If people don't have something horrific shoved in front of their face, if they can't see the actual bad thing, we tend to ignore it. I mean, think of the police shootings that have been happening. That stuff's been going on forever. It's the fact that everybody has a cell phone and we're having to actually watch people get murdered by cops that has created the stir. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn. At what point do you draw the line and say, "Whoa, this is so bad that you're so much taking advantage of the children that it doesn't matter whether you guess that it will overall have a good effect." I'm not really sure, but I do think there's value in being provocative because that's the only way you get people to pay attention to things.
I think it's a good question, and the way I
It's
was thinking
tough.
of, yeah, what I was thinking about it in ways was when I see that dance video, it repulses me, and I just want to know, why did it repulse me? Like, what is inherently wrong about sexualizing children? So I was asking my wife. My wife and me were discussing this. I was like, what is inherently wrong about sexualizing children? There's clearly something wrong with it, but I want to like be able to vocalize what it is, because when it comes to other things that are morally wrong, I think it's easier. Like, I can vocalize that murdering somebody is wrong because the person whose life I take didn't consent to it. If they would have consented to it, it wouldn't have been murder. It would have been assisted suicide. The same thing for theft. I know that theft is wrong because it lacks that consent. If I steal something from somebody and I have their permission, then I'm not really stealing it from them, it's trade. We can go to rape as another example. If it lacks that consent, if I rape somebody, I did not get their consent to have sex with them. If I did, it wouldn't be rape. So then I thought, okay, here's these three things. I'm gonna apply it here. You can't sexualize children because they can't consent. And then somebody pointed out, well, what if they did get consent? And what if the parents gave consent? And so that kind of pokes a hole through my initial thought on it. I'm like, well, if the kid gives consent, then I think a conservative's point of view would be, well, she can't give consent because it's a child, so you have to ask their parents. But then what happens if the parents give consent? What are you going to do then? Be like, well, they're irresponsible, so we have to get their grandparents' consent. And you could be like, well, they also consented. And you could go down this line until you get the answer you want, until you find somebody who can claim responsibility for the child who will not give the consent. And that's good to get your way, but it doesn't explain what is inherently wrong about sexualizing children. But then I started thinking a little bit more, and I think there is a consent aspect to it. I think there are things in which a person cannot consent to that nobody else can also consent for them. Their parents can't consent for them. And I'll go back to the murder. If a kid goes around and scrapes their leg and says they're in so much pain they want to be killed, you could say, well, the kid can't consent to that. But you can also say the parents definitely cannot consent to that. That's a little extreme. That would be murder. Same thing with theft. A kid
Right.
couldn't just give away their social security number and consent to it. You'd be like, no, that's not possible. And you definitely wouldn't let the parents consent to that. That would be an abuse of some sort. And that's why marrying off children is wrong. A child can't consent to marriage, and their parents consenting it is absurd. So I think this is one of those activities in which sure these 11 to 14-year-old actresses may have consented to do this job, to be sexualized on film. They shouldn't have been able to consent to it because they were children, and their parents shouldn't have been able to consent to it. I think that's where I come down on it, that why it's wrong. Now, I'm sure that brings in a lot of other issues about when you can and can't tell a parent that they have power to consent for their child. But at least I'm fine with drawing the line there. There are some acts that nobody but the individual can consent to, and if that individual isn't old enough, then they shouldn't do it regardless of who else gives them consent. To be fair to, I guess, to this whole going back to the author, just to be fair to them, it does seem though that he's responding to people who are also he's responding to and talking past people who are also talking past him. So the author's like whole point was that the movie doesn't celebrate sexualizing children, right?
Right.
And people on the right who he accuses of being on the right are saying, well, you basically have a child porno. So it's kind of like I'm empathizing with the people that he would consider to be right wing, but they're technically wrong. It's not a child porno. It's gross, but it's not child pornography at that level.
Right.
But I think they realize that there is a problem out there with child sexualization, and they just can't kind of like express exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, one thing, as far as the consent, too, I think there is definitely a class of fully grown adults who can be diagnosed by a consensus of doctors or psychologists to be incapable of making that decision. And don't we have to? France is a different culture that I've never been to. I don't know. I can only go off my own intuition. But that's the sort of thing. If I put it to a vote, parents who are willing to let their children do this, I just have to ask the question if they deserve to have consent to allow to have it done. Yeah, the article though, this guy's kind of pointing out the obvious. Yeah, the people that never watched the movie and haven't really looked into what its message actually is, they're wrong about it, and that's pretty easy to understand. Even having not seen the movie, it does seem to clearly be pointing out a problem, and so I don't feel like he's making a big. That seems a little more obvious to me. And then him pointing out, he has to throw in that line at the end, giving the right wingers a conniption fit. Totally unnecessary. It kind of shows his colors, kind of maybe where his bias is about who to blame for the outrage, and who's stupid enough not to understand it. There's something uppity about that. But sure, yeah, he's right. Yeah, the movie is making a point, but I think it's a little bit of a straw man for people who are saying, no, actually, we get it. We get what it's trying to do. It's just doing it in a disgusting, unnecessary way. So I totally get that. That makes sense. My question just comes back to, when is it okay to potentially cause harm, to create buzz enough to get people off their ass to do something about a situation in society that we all agree in general is not a place we want to delve into? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that was pretty good. Do you have any last thoughts?
Yes.
Well, we're out of time.